In the following pages, I have attempted to present in an interesting form some of the popular traditions and legends of New England. The field is a new one, and I have but partially explored it. New England is rich in traditionary lore, a thousand associations of superstition and manly daring, and romantic adventure are connected with her green hills and pleasant rivers. I leave the task of rescuing these associations from oblivion to some more fortunate individual, and if this little volume shall have the effect to induce such an effort, I shall at least be satisfied, whatever may be the judgment of the public upon my humble production. I have in many instances alluded to the superstition and bigotry of our ancestors, the rare and bold race who laid the foundation of this republic, but no one can accuse me of having done injustice to their memories. A son of New England, and proud of my birthplace, I would not willingly cast dishonor upon its founders. My feelings in this respect have already been expressed, in language which I shall be pardoned, I trust, for introducing in this place. O never may a son of thine, where his wandering steps incline, forget the sky which bent above his childhood like a dream of love, the stream beneath the green hills flowing, the broad-armed trees above him growing, the clear breeze through the foliage blowing. O hear unmoved the taunt of scorn, breathe o'er the brave New England born, or mark the stranger's jaguar hand disturb the ashes of thy dead, the buried glory of the land whose soil with noble blood is red, and sanctified in every part, nor feel resentment like a brand, unsheathing from his fiery heart. An apology is even in worse taste than a preface, but I would simply state that this volume was written during the anxieties and perplexing cares attendant upon the management of a political and literary periodical. I wish to relate to you, dear siblings, a chilling tale, but I fear that if I do, you'll never look upon the seaside the same way again. And I wonder if you can help me read it. In the 17th century, when the sea robbers were ravaging the commerce of Spain, a vessel of the nation was brought into the port of Marblehead, by a group...
Pirates?
Yes, allow me to finish. A vessel of the nation was brought into the port of Marblehead by a pirate brig. For the better security of its rich cargo, the unfortunate crew were barbarously massacred. The lady was brought on shore by the pirates and murdered, and after being buried in a deep glen or valley, at a little distance from the village, there is a tradition among the old inhabitants of Marblehead that shrieks have been heard ever since, at intervals of 2 or 3 years, in the valley where the lady was buried. And the tale begins like this. The Murdered Lady. A dark-hulled brig at anchor rides, within the still and moonlight bay, and round its black, portentous sides, the waves like living creatures play. And close at hand a tall ship lies, a voyager from the Spanish main, laden with gold and merchandise, she'll never be seen again. The fisher in the seaward skiff creeps stealthily along the shore, within the shadow of the cliff, where keel had never plowed before. He turns him from the stranger bark, and hurries down the silver bay, where like a demon still and dark, she watches o'er her prey.
The midnight came a dash of oars, broke on the ocean's stillness then, and swept towards the rocky shores. The fierce wild forms from outlawed men, the tenants of the fearful ship, grouped strangely in the pale moonlight, dark iron-browed, bearded-lipped, ghastly with storm and fight. They've reached the shore, but who is she, the white-robed one they bear along? She shrieks, she struggles to be free. God shields that gentle one from wrong. It may not be those pirate men, along the hushed, deserted street, have borne her to the narrow glen, scarce trod by human feet.
And there the ruffians murdered her, when not an eye, save heaven's beheld, ask of the shuddering villager, what sounds upon the night air swelled, woman's long shriek of mortal fear. Her wild appear to hearts of stone, the oath, the taunt, the brutal jeer, the pistol shot, the groan. With shout and jest and lawful song, from savage tongues which knew no rein, The stained with murder passed along, and sought their ocean home again. And all the night their revel came, in hoarse and sullen murmurs on. A yell rang up, a burst of flame. The Spanish ship was gone. The morning light came red and fast, along the still and blushing sea. The phantoms of the night had passed. That ocean robber, where was she? Her sails were reaching from the wind, her crimson banner folds were stirred, and ever and anon behind her shouting crew were heard.
Then came the village dwellers forth, and sought with fear their fatal glen. The stain of blood, the trampled earth told where the deed of death had been. They found a grave, a new-made one, with bloody sabres hollowed out, and shadowed from the searching sun by tall trees round about. They left the hapless stranger there. They knew her sleep would be as well as if the priest had poured his prayer above her with the funeral bell. The few poor rites which man can pay are felt not by the lonely sleeper. The deaf unconscious ear of clay heeds not the living weeper. They tell a tale, those sea-worn men, who dwell along that rocky coast, of sights and sounds within the glen, of midnight shriek and gliding ghost. And oh, if ever from their chill and dreamless sleep the dead arise, the victim of unhallowed ill might wake to human eyes.
They say that often when the morn is struggling with the gloomy even, the curtain of a clouded heaven, strange sounds swell up the narrow glen, as if the robber crew were there, the hellish laugh and shouts of men, and women's dying prayer.
Is that really the truth?
Is that close to us?
I have a book here and I can show you.
Can you take us to the murdered lady's grave?
No!
What if I tell you another tale instead? Some 50 or 60 years since, an inhabitant of New Hampshire was found dead at a little distance from his dwelling, which he left in the morning in perfect health. There is a story prevalent among the people of the neighborhood that on the evening of the day on which he was found dead, strange cries are annually heard to issue from his grave. I have conversed with some who really suppose that they had heard them in the dead of the night, rising fearfully on the autumn wind. They represented the sounds to be of a most appalling and unearthly nature. Idle as this story may be, it is made the subject of the following lines.
The hunter went forth with his dog and gun in the earliest glow of the golden sun. The trees of the forest bent over his way in the changeful colors of autumn gay. For a frost had fallen the night before on the quiet greenness which nature wore. A bitter frost, for the night was chill and starry and dark, and the wind was still. And so when the sun looked out on the hills, on the stricken woods and the frosted rills, the unvaried green of that landscape fled, and a wild rich robe was given instead. We know not whither the hunter went, or how the last of his days were spent.
For the noon drew nigh, but he came not back, weary and faint from his forest track, and his wife sat down to her frugal board beside the empty seat of her lord. And the day passed on, and the sun came down to the hills of the west like an angel's crown. The shadows lengthened from wood and hill, the mist crept up from the meadow rill, till the broad sun sank and the red light rolled all over the west like a wave of gold. Yet he came not back, though the stars gave forth their wizard light to the silent earth. And his wife looked out from the lattice dim, in the earnest manner of fear for him. And his fair-haired child on the doorstone stood, to welcome his father back from the wood. He came not back, yet they found him soon, in the burning light of the morrow's noon, in the fixed and visionless sleep of death, where the red leaves fell at the soft wind's breath, and the dog whose step in the chase was fleet crouched silent and sad at the hunter's feet.
He slept in death, but his sleep was one, which his neighbors shuddered to look upon, for his brow was black, and his open eye was red with a sigh of agony. And they thought as they gazed on his featured grin that an evil deed had been done on him. They buried him where his father laid, by the mossy mounds in the graveyard shade. Yet whispers of doubt passed over the dead, and the beldames muttered while prayers were said. And the hand of the sexton shook as he pressed the damp of the earth on the hunter's breast. The seasons passed in the autumn rain, and the colored forest returned again. 'Twas the very eve the hunter died. The winds wailed over the bare hillside, and the withering limbs of the forest shook their red leaves over the swollen brook. They came a sound on the night air then, like a spirit shriek to the home of men. And louder and shriller it rose again, like the fearful cry of the mad with pain.
and trembled alike the timid and brave, for they knew that it came from the hunter's grave. And every year when autumn flings its beautiful robe on created things, when Piscataqua's tide is turbid with rain, and Cochico's woods are yellow again, that cry is heard from the graveyard earth, like a howl of a demon struggling forth.
I know you write haunting verse, Greenleaf, but I wish you would share one of your stories with us.
I would share one, but I fear it is too frightening for some among us.
I'm not afraid.
Don't be a child, Elizabeth. Go on.
The haunted house is unfinished, and I may add some lines later. I'm really not prepared to share it.
Go on.
It was on the margin of this Merrimack River, during the early times of Massachusetts, that a stranger, a foreigner of considerable fortune, took up his residence. He had a house, constructed from a model of his own, which for elegance and convenience far surpassed the rude and simple tenements of his neighbors. And he had a small farm, or rather garden, which he seemed to cultivate for amusement, rather than from any absolute necessity of labor. He had no family, save a daughter, an interesting girl of 16. Near the dwelling of Adam O'Corn, for such was the stranger's name, lived old Alice Knight, a woman, known throughout the whole valley of the river, from Plum Island to the residence of the sachem Pasconaway, on the Nashua, as one under an evil influence, an ill-tempered and malignant old woman, who was seriously suspected of dealing with the Prince of Darkness. Many of her neighbors were ready to make the oath that they had been haunted by old Alice, in the shape of a black cat, that she had taken the wheels off their hay carts and frozen down their sled runners when the team was in full motion, that she had bewitched their swine and rendered their cattle unruly neigh. More than one good wife averred that she had bewitched their churns and prevented the butter from forming, and that they could expel her in no other way than heating a horse-nail and casting it into their cream. Moreover, they asserted that when this method of exorcism was resorted to, the invariability learned soon after that goodwife Alice was suffering under some unknown indisposition. In short, it would be idle to attempt a description of an almost innumerable feats of witchcraft ascribed to the withered and decrepit Alice.
Her exterior was well calculated to favor the idea of her supernatural qualifications. She had the long, blue, and skinny finger, the elvish locks of gray and scraggling hair, the hooked nose, and the long, upturned chin, and which seemed perpetually to threaten its nasal neighbor, the blue lips drawn around a mouth, garnished with 2 or 3 unearthly-looking fangs, the bleared and sunken eye, the bowed and attenuated form, and the limping gait, as if the invisible fetters of the evil one were actually clogging the footsteps of his servant. Then, too, she was poor as the genius of poverty itself. She had no relatives about her, no friends. Her hand was against every man, and every man's hand was against her. Setting the powers of her witchcraft aside, Alice Knight was actually an evil-hearted woman. Whether the suspicions and taunts of her neighbors had aroused into action those evil passions which slumber in the seldom visited depths of the human heart, or whether the mortifications of poverty and dependence had changed and perverted her proud spirit, certain it was that she took advantage of the credulity and fears of her neighbors. When they in the least offended her, she turned upon them with the fierce malice of an enraged pythoness, and prophesied darkly of some unknown and indescribable evil about to befall them. And, consequently, if any evil did befall them in the space of a 12-month afterward, another mark was added to the already black list of iniquities, which was accredited to the ill-favored Alice. With all her fierce and deep-rooted hatred of the human species, one solitary affection, one feeling of kindness, yet lingered in the bosom of Alice Knight. Her son, a young man of 25, her only child, seemed to form the sole and last link of the chain which had once bound her to humanity. Her love of him partook of the fierce passions of her nature. It was wild, ungovernable, and strong as her hate itself.
Gilbert Knight inherited little from his mother, save a portion from her indomitable pride and fierce temperament. He had been a seaman and visited many of old lands, and returned again to his birthplace, a grown-up, with a man with a sunburned cheek and a fine noble figure, a countenance rude and forbidding, yet marked with his character of intellect and conquisive power. He had little intercourse with his mother. He refused to even reside in the same dwelling with her, and yet, when in her presence, he was respectful, and even indulgent to her with a single disposition of unsocial habits.
Mary, the daughter of Adam McCorn, seemed alone to engage the attention of Gilbert Knight. She was young, beautiful, and, considering the condition of the country, well educated. She naturally felt herself superior to the rude and hard-featured youth around her. She had tasted enough of the sentiment, and received enough of the polish of education, to raise her ideas, at least, above the ignorant and unlettered rustics who sought her favor.
It was a cold, dark night of autumn that Gilbert, after leaving the hospitable fireside of McCorn, directed his steps to the rude and lonely dwelling of his mother. He found that an old woman alone, a few sticks of ignited wood cast a faint light upon the dismal apartment, and an old and bleary-eyed cat was at her side, gazing earnestly at her unseemly countenance.
"Mother!" said Gilbert, seating himself. "'Tis idle, 'tis worse, than fully a dream of executing our project. Mary McCorn will never be my wife."
Ha! Exclaimed Alice, fixing her hollow eye upon her son. Have I not told you that it should be so, and must be? You have lost your courage. You have become weaker than a woman, Gilbert. I tell you that Mary McCorn loves you as deeply, as passionately as ever man was loved by woman.
Gilbert started. "I do believe she loves me," he said, at length, "but she will never be my wife. She dreads an alliance with our family. She has said so that on this night solemnly arrived, that she would rather die at once than become the daughter-in-law of..."
"Of a witch!" shrieked Alice, in a voice so loud and shrill that it even startled the practiced ear of Gilbert. "'Tis well. I will not be stigmatized as a witch with impunity. That haughty Scotchman and his impudent brat of a daughter shall learn that Alice Knight is not to be insulted in this manner. Gilbert, you shall marry her, or she shall die accursed."
"Mother!" said Gilbert, rising and fixing his dark eye nearly on his mother. "I understand your threat, and I warn you to beware your practice of infernal tricks upon others. You please, but Mary McCorn is too pure and too scared for such unhallowed dealing. And you dread the curses of your son. Let her not be molested." He turned away and ceased speaking, and instantly left the dwelling.
But Mary McCord, much as she loved the dark-eyed stranger, and his tales of peril and shipwreck in other climes, could not associate herself with the son of a witch. And so she strove with a strong feeling of affection within her, and Gilbert Knight was rejected. A short time after, the tenants of the dwelling of McCorn were alarmed by strange sounds and unusual appearances. In the dead of the night, they were to hear heavy footsteps ascending the staircase, with the clank of a chain, and groans issued from the unoccupied rooms of the building. The doors were mysteriously opened, after having been carefully secured. The curtains of the beds of McCorn and his daughter were drawn aside by an unseen hand, and low whispers of blasphemy and licentiousness, which a spirit of evil could only have suggested, were breathed, as it were, into their very ears. The servants, a male and female, alike complained of preternatural visitations and unseemly visions. They were disturbed in their daily avocations. The implements of household labor were snatched away by an invisible hand. They saw strange lights in the neighborhood of the dwelling. They heard an unearthly music in the chimney, and saw the furniture of the room dancing about, as if moving to the infernal melody. In short, the fact was soon established that beyond the interposition of a doubt, that the house was haunted. The visitations to the house of McCorn became more frequent and more terrific. The unfortunate Mary suffered severely. She fully believed in the supernatural character of the sights and sounds which alarmed her, and she looked upon old Alice Knight as the author, especially after hearing a whisper in her ear, in the darkness of midnight, that, unless she married Gilbert Knight, she should be haunted as long as she lived. As for the father, he battled long and manfully with the fears which were strengthened day by day. He laughed at the strange noises which filled his mansion, and ridiculed the fears of his daughter. But it was easy to see that his strong mind was shaken by the controlling superstitions of the time, and he yielded slowly to the belief, which had now extended itself through the neighborhood, that his dwelling was under the immediate influence of demonic agency. Many were the experiments tried throughout the neighborhood for the discovery of the witch, The old, experienced grandmothers gathered together almost every evening for consultation, and divers and multiform were the plans devised for counteracting the designs of Satan. All admitted that Alice Knight must be the witch, but unfortunately there was no positive proof of the fact. All charms and forms of exorcism, which were then believed to be potent weapons for overthrowing the powers of wickedness, having failed, it was finally settled among the good ladies that the minister of the parish could alone drive the evil spirits from the dwelling of their neighbor. But Adam McCorn was a sinful man. His oaths had been louder than his prayers on this trying occasion, and when it was proposed to him to invite the godly parson to his house for the purpose of laying the spirits that troubled it, he swore fiercely that rather than have his threshold darkened by the Puritan priest, he would see his dwelling converted into the devil's ballroom, and thronged with all the evil spirits on the face of the earth or beneath it. And, with shaking heads and prophetic visages, the good woman left the perverse Scotchman to his fate.
His evenings were lonely and long, and he resolved to invite Gilbert Knight, the fierce sailor, who feared neither man nor friend, to take up his residence with him, in the firm belief that no power, human or superhuman, could shake the nerves of a man who had wrestled with the tempest upon every sea, who had braved death in the red battle, when his shattered decks were slippery with blood and piled with human corpses.
Gilbert obeyed the summons of McCorn with pleasure. Besides, he trusted that should he only succeed in accomplishing his purpose in laying the evil spirits of the mansion, he should eventually secure to himself the gratitude of both father and daughter. Gilbert was received with much cordially by Adam McCorn.
Even Mary McCorn welcomed the presence of her discarded lover, yet, while she clung to him as her only protector, she shuddered at the thought that Gilbert was the son of her evil tormentor. Nay more, the horrible suspicion would at times steal over her that he himself prompted his wicked parent to haunt her and terrify her into acquiescence with his wishes. But when she heard his frank and manly proposal to watch all night in a chamber where the strange sights and sounds were most frequent, she could not but trust that her suspicion was ill-founded, and that in Gilbert Knight she could find a friend and protector.
Adam McCorn, secretly overjoyed at the idea of having sentinel in his dwelling, ordered a fire to be kindled in the suspected chamber, and placing a decanter of spirits on the table, he bade his guest good night, and left him to the loneliness of the haunted apartment.
The old family clock struck 1. At the moment, a deep groan sounded fearfully through the room. Gilbert rose to his feet and listened earnestly. It seemed to proceed for the room beneath him, and it was repeated several times until it died away. Like the last murmurs of one of the agonizes of death, in a few moments he heard footsteps on the staircase ascending to a long, narrow passage. At the head of it was his apartment. "I will know the cause of this," said Gilbert mentally as he threw open the door and sprang into the passage. A figure attempted to glide past him, apparelled in white, uttering as it did so a deep, hollow groan. "Murder or devil!" shouted Gilbert, springing forward and grasping at the figure by his arms. "You go no further! Speak, witch, ghost, whatever you are, I declare you're earned!" The figure struggled violently, but the iron grasp of Gilbert remained unshaken. At the moment he heard the hurried voice of the old Scotchman sounded through the passage. "Hudwield, Budwield, my braw lad! Denny, let your grip in God's name, Hudwield!"
"Let me go," said the figure in a hoarse whisper. "Let me go, or you are a dead man." Gilbert retained his hold, and endeavored to discover by the dim light which streamed from his apartment the countenance of the speaker. "Die then, unnatural wretch!" shrieked the detested Alex, snatching a knife from her bosom and aiming a furious stab at her son. Gilbert pressed his hand to his side and staggered backward, exclaiming, as the features of his mother, not fully revealed, glared madly upon him,
"Woman, you have murdered your son!"
The knife dropped from the hand of Alice, and with a loud and almost demonic shriek, she sprang down the staircase and vanished like a specter.
Adam McCorn hurried forward the moment he saw the white figure disappear, and followed Gilbert into the apartment. "Are you hurt? Are you already smitten?" asked the Scotchman, and then his eyes fell on the bloody dress of Gilbert. He exclaimed, "Waste me! Ye are streaking with blood! Ye are a dead man!"
Gilbert felt that his wound was severe. But his unusual presence of mind he gave directions to McHorn and his daughter, as enabled them to prevent the rapid infusion of blood, while a servant was dispatched for the nearest physician.
The arrival of the physician dissipated to some degree the fears of McHorn and his daughter. The wound of Gilbert was not considered as dangerous, and as was assured that a few days of confinement would be the only ill consequence resulting from it. The kind-hearted Scotchman and his kinder-hearted daughter watched by his bed until morning, at which time Gilbert was enabled to explain the singular circumstance of the night, and at the same time he expressed a wish that McHorn should visit the dwelling of his mother, who he feared would resort to some violence upon herself, in the belief that she had, in her frantic passion, murdered her son. Adam McHorn, convinced by the narration of Gilbert that human ingenuity and malice, instead of demonic agency, had disrupted his dwelling, sailed out early in the morning to the rude and crazy dwelling of his tormentor.
He found the door open, and on entering, the first object that met his view was the form of Alice Knight, lying on the floor, insensible and motionless. He spoke to her, but she answered not. He lifted her arm, and it fell back with a dead weight upon her side. She was dead, whether by terror or suicide he knew not. She was buried the next day in the small garden adjoining her dwelling, for the good people of the neighborhood could not endure the idea of her reposing in their own quiet graveyard.
It is said that Alice did not sleep peacefully, nayless the prayers of the minister. Her house was often lighted up in the dead of night, and the wild and unearthly figure of the old woman herself crossed more than once the paths of the good people of the neighborhood. At least, such is the story, and it is not our present purpose to dispute it. The manner in which old Alice contrived to perplex the Scotchman and his daughter was at length revealed by the disclosures of the servants of the family. They had been persuaded by the old woman to aid her in the strange transactions, partly from an innate love of mischief, and partly from a pique against the worthy Scotchman, whose irritable temperament had more than once discovered itself in the unceremonious collision of his cane with the heads and shoulders of his domestics. Gilbert recovered rapidly of his wound, and a few months after, the house, which had been given over to the evil power as the reveling place of demons, was brilliantly illuminated for a merry bridal, and the rough, bold sailor, as the husband of Mary McHorn, settled down into a quiet, industrious, and sober-minded citizen. Adam McHorn lived to a good old age, stoutly denying to the last that he had ever admitted the idea of witchcraft, and laughing, hardly as before, at the superstitions and credulity of his neighbors. Mary, would you accompany me on the way to my room?
Greenleaf, why don't you share the poem you've been working on?
It is not yet part of my collection.
It will appease Elizabeth. If memory serves, it was seasonal, but not as frightening.
All right, start us off, Elizabeth.
Oh, green land fair in the lands of the sun, the vines of the gourd and the rich melon run, and the rock and the tree and the cottage enfold, with broad leaves all greenness and blossoms all gold, like that which o'er Nineveh's prophet once grew, while he waited to know that his warning was true, and longed for the storm cloud, and listened in vain for the rush of the whirlwind and red fire rain.
On the banks of the Zenil, the dark Spanish maiden comes up with the fruit of the tangled vine laden, and the Creole of Cuba laughs out to behold, through orange leaves shining the broad spheres of gold. Yet with dearer delight from his home in the north, on the fields of his harvest, the Yankee looks forth, where crooknecks are coiling and yellow fruit shines, and the sun of September melts down on his vines.
On Thanksgiving Day, when from east and from west, from north and from south, comes the pilgrim and guests, when the gray-haired New Englanders see around his board the old broken links of the affection restored, when the care-wearied man seeks his mother once more, and the warm matron smiles on the girl smiled before, what moistens the lip and what brightens the eye, what calls back the past like a rich pumpkin pie.
O fruit loved by boyhood, and old days recalling, when wood grapes were purpling and brown nuts were falling, when wild, ugly faces were carved in its skin, glaring out to the dark with a candle within, when we laughed on the corn heaps, with hearts all in tune, our chair a broad pumpkin, our lantern the moon, telling tales of the fairy who traveled like steam in a pumpkin shell coach with 2 rats for her team. Then thanks for thy present, none sweeter or better, e'er smoked from an oven or circled a platter. Fairer hands never wrought at a pastry more fine, brighter eyes never washed o'er his baking than mine. And the prayer which my mouth is too full to express swells my heart that thy shadow may never be less, that the days of thy lot may be lengthened below, and the fame of thy worth like a pumpkin vine grow, and thy life be as sweet as in its last sunset sky, golden tinted and fair as thy own pumpkin pie.
Now I feel as if I can walk upstairs alone.
Still, I will accompany you.
That will do.